In the dim light of the night, Richard Blake's large mansion stood like an impregnable fortress in the middle of the upper class. The cold stone walls were covered with lush green vines, and the dim yellow light shone on the towering iron gate. The iron bars curved in classical patterns gleamed under the streetlights, forming a solid barrier between the outside world and the private world inside. The house did not feel like a home, but rather a place filled with such a thick silence that one could hear the steady ticking of the clock, each rhythm evoking the feeling of time passing in invisible solitude. The polished wood-paneled walls reflected the light from the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, creating countless tiny dancing rays of light, but not a single laugh or word rang out. Richard Blake, the owner of the house, was a 62-year-old man, slim in build, but still unmistakably elegant and refined. He wore a tailored suit in a dark gray color, a neatly buttoned white shirt collar, and an angular face with carefully combed silver hair. Those deep eyes, once praised by many as razor-sharp, now had an empty look, like bottomless wells, reflecting an indelible loneliness. He walked slowly through the large living room, each step leaving no trace on the cold marble floor. Richard was a man of habit, every detail of his life arranged in perfect order, from the pure white vases of flowers that were replaced every 3 days, to the meticulously maintained antique clock that never lost a second. But that very perfection created an invisible distance, separating him from the outside world and from the people around him. Silence, he whispered in his mind, like a loyal friend through the years, only silence keeps things from going wrong. Tonight, like every other night, Richard woke at 2:15 a.m., a strange habit that he couldn't explain, but didn't want to fight. He woke up because his throat was dry and thirsty. Without turning on the lights, he walked down the grand staircase of polished ebony, so as not to disturb the silence of the house. Under his feet were perfectly washed and arranged carpets, not a single wrinkle or dirt. As he approached the kitchen, a faint light peeking through the crack in the door made him stop. The house was so tightly staffed that no one was allowed outside of work hours, especially in the kitchen area. The presence of light at this moment was inexplicable. Richard opened the door slightly, the light from the ceiling lamp falling on a large white marble kitchen counter. There, a small figure sat, surrounded by books and papers. Amara, the maid he had thought was a faceless figure in the house, was studying intently. A loose gray sweater covered her maid's uniform, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a pencil tucked behind her ear, her black hair tied in a small bun, not a single strand showing. The girl's face was one of deep concentration, her brow slightly furrowed as she tried to understand each line in the thick book. Her large brown eyes stared intently at the page, the lamplight illuminating each stroke of the letter and the anatomical diagrams drawn meticulously in black ink. A simple beauty, but one that Richard could not take his eyes off. He cleared his throat, letting her know he was there, but not wanting to startle her too much. Amara looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and alarm at the sight of him. "Excuse me, sir. I didn't think anyone was awake," she mumbled, standing up hastily, knocking over a cup of tea on the table. I'll clear it up right away." Richard raised his hand to signal her to sit down, his voice warm and without any reproach. "It's okay. I just went down to get some water." "What are you studying?" Amara lowered her eyes, then replied carefully, "I'm preparing for an online medical program, sir. I want to be a doctor." Richard was so surprised that he couldn't say anything, only a gentle look mixed with a bit of astonishment. Part of him felt proud, part of him felt something breaking in his heart, a sudden awakening after so many years of darkness. "Oh, really, doctor, that sounds good." "Yes. I don't want to be just a maid, I don't want to be helpless like when my father died because he couldn't be saved in time," she replied, her eyes shining with a determined fire. Richard nodded, a small smile playing on his lips, a smile. Then he quietly walked back to his bedroom. The next morning, the gentle spring sunlight filtered through the thick curtains, covering the wooden walls of the villa in a warm yellow. But the atmosphere inside the house remained as quiet as usual, completely different from the bustling life outside. Richard sat in his study, filled with dark papers and abstract paintings, the light from the large windows falling on the polished wooden table. A steaming cup of coffee was in front of him, but his mind was on the image of the small maid, Amara, who he had considered an invisible part of the house. He remembered the days before, when she was just a quiet figure, always avoiding people's eyes, working quickly and skillfully like a gentle breeze passing through the hallway. She always wore a boring, loose uniform as if to hide her small body. Her figure was thin but graceful, her silky black hair was neatly tied up, not a single strand falling on her face. Her face, even without makeup or powder, still exuded a simple beauty, with deep brown eyes, always avoiding the gaze of others. Every day, Amara moved around the large mansion like an inseparable part of a perfectly functioning machine. She wiped down each table, folded each napkin, and placed each white flower in a silver vase with meticulous care. But none of the people who worked there ever really looked at her, not because they didn't want to, but because Amara always chose to be invisible, so as not to make any noise or attract attention. Richard had thought that someone like her, quiet, undemanding, and only interested in work, was exactly the type of person he needed to keep his life together. But when he saw her the night before, he suddenly realized that he had made a serious mistake in not giving her enough insight and understanding. Recalling the scene from last night, he still felt his heart beat faster every time he thought of Amara sitting beside a pile of books, the kitchen light shining on her attentive face, the corners of her lips pressed tightly together in a show of determination. She was no longer a simple maid, but a girl with a burning desire, a person with a soul and dreams of her own. As Richard was lost in thought, soft footsteps sounded outside the door. Amara appeared, holding a small tray with several vases of white flowers. As she passed, their eyes met once more, no longer shy and evasive, but with a silent understanding, like an unspoken promise. "Sir, I have prepared breakfast for you," she said softly, her voice like a cool breeze that dispelled the chill of the room. Richard nodded, smiling softly. "Thank you, Amara." At that moment, he realized that in her simplicity and silence there was an unpredictable power. It was the power of faith, of will, and of love for her family and herself. Over the next few days, Richard began to pay more attention to Amara. He watched her fold her clothes with ritualistic precision, the way she placed each cup on the dining table in its proper place, and the times she paused to look out the window, her eyes distant and thoughtful. Once, he saw Amara bend down to pick up a piece of paper that had fallen on the floor and gently fold it before placing it in the trash, a small action but enough for him to realize that she always cared about the smallest things. He began asking the housekeeper about the girl. "How long has Amara been working here?" he asked casually, but his curiosity was filled with an unprecedented intensity. "About 3 years, sir," the manager replied. "She was a very hard worker and dedicated. Never demanding or troublesome. She kept to herself and sent most of her pay back to her family in Louisiana." That information made Richard think. That little girl, silently enduring so many hardships, was living a life that he had never noticed before. One afternoon, Richard saw Amara standing by the window, holding a small letter in her hand. She looked out, her eyes filled with sadness and a hint of hope. Although he had no idea what was going on in her mind, he sensed that something was hidden inside her. Richard knew that Amara's life was not like that of the upper-class people around him. She had to fight every day to keep her dream alive, and had to shoulder the responsibility of her family and future. But he also knew that this little girl was teaching him something about resilience, compassion, and strength of will. From then on, a new feeling began to grow in Richard's heart: empathy, concern, and a strong belief that maybe people like Amara would bring true light to this life. In the following days, the mansion continued to function smoothly and perfectly. But to Richard, the world inside began to change slightly, as if it were a sign that something was about to happen. Every night he woke up at 2 a.m. It wasn't thirst or habit anymore, but an inexplicable urge. This time, when he walked down the stairs, he was looking for more than just water, for a connection, a reason to feel like life wasn't completely meaningless. When he saw the soft light from the kitchen again, he did not hesitate to open the door and step in. Amara was still sitting there, her head bowed over her books, the soft yellow light illuminating her tired but determined face. The kitchen was so quiet that Richard could hear the sound of pages turning, the pencil tapping on paper, and her steady breathing. The scent of hot tea mixed with the scent of wood from the tables and chairs created a warm and intimate atmosphere, in stark contrast to the cold and distant atmosphere in the house. Amara didn't seem to notice him standing there at first. She repeated the anatomical terms under her breath, mumbling each word, as if to commit it to memory. Her eyes held a mixture of exhaustion and faith, attention but also hope. Richard walked closer, his voice gentle, not startling her at all. "Do you study this late every day? Don't you rest?" Amara raised her head, her eyes slightly surprised, then quickly hid her surprise with a weak smile. "Yes, I just want to take advantage of every minute to prepare for the exam. I don't have much time, sir." Richard sat down in the chair next to her, quietly observing her. He understood that her dream was not simply a personal desire but also a difficult journey. A dream bound by family responsibilities, by untold hardships. Richard looked at the pile of books, thick ones, each page discolored and covered with pencil marks. He saw in them not only knowledge but also hopes, unfulfilled dreams, and the fear of failure. "Don't you ever think of resting?" Richard asked again, like a worried old father. Amara hesitated, looked down at the table, and sighed. "I have no other choice, sir. If I stop working, my family will not have money to pay the rent, buy medicine for my mother, and pay for my siblings' education. I know my dream may not be easy to achieve, but I cannot give up." Those words were like a sharp knife stabbing straight into Richard's heart. He wondered if he had ever felt such a burden, or had he just lived in safety and isolation. He nodded and said, "Well, a girl with dreams and ambitions, that's commendable. But looking at you, I remember my youth. I wasn't born at the finish line, I wasn't as rich as I am now. I started from scratch. My family was the poorest in the neighborhood. We didn't have enough to eat." Amara listened attentively as Richard told her about his life. But he didn't finish, he just stopped there, as if to give her more motivation. It was the first time she learned about her boss's past, which made her extremely impressed and admired. A moment of silence fell. The night outside was cold, but in the small kitchen, the warm yellow light seemed to dispel the darkness of their lives. Richard stood up, walked closer and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Keep trying, I believe you will achieve your dream." Amara felt the warmth of his hand, a sudden trust that made her feel less lonely than ever. She never thought that a man like Richard, with his luxurious and strict life, could understand and care for a little girl like her. At that moment, they said nothing more. Only understanding was built in silence, like a small flame blossoming in the long dark night. The first morning light filtered through the large windows, casting soft shadows across the floor. In Amara's small room, everything was quiet except for the steady ticking of the clock and her soft breathing. The simple bed had nothing special except for a thin gray blanket and a few books piled on the bedside table. That was her whole world, a simple world but filled with so many aspirations and hopes. Each page, each word was a step on the long journey to escape the darkness of the past. Amara woke up at 5 a.m. as usual. Not because of lack of sleep, but because of strong self-awareness and determination. In the gentle dawn light, she sat up, bending over with a small figure, her face still showing signs of fatigue but her eyes still shining with faith. Her thin hands carefully folded the pages of her schoolwork, then placed them in a worn dark blue cloth bag. The smudged ink and scribbled letters on the edges of the pages were evidence of the sleepless nights and the dreams that never let her rest. Before leaving the room, Amara looked at the small photo placed on the table, a picture of her mother and her two siblings smiling. Her mother's face was wrinkled with time and her eyes were filled with unspoken longing. She took a deep breath, as if to absorb the breath of hope and responsibility that weighed on her shoulders. She thought to herself, "I will definitely do it." Leaving her room, Amara walked down the long hallway, where the light barely reached the walls covered in classical motifs. Her steps were light, even cautious, so as not to disturb the silence that pervaded the house. Every day, she became a ghost, both present and absent. When she got to the kitchen, she took the tray she had prepared the night before to serve breakfast to her hostess. Although she knew that housekeeping took up most of her time and energy, she still tried to use these peaceful moments to think about the future. Before leaving the house, Amara looked in the mirror. Her face was thin but determined. Her black hair was tied back, her school uniform was neatly pressed despite its age. She had nothing flashy, but in her eyes, Richard saw an unquenchable light. She knew that her dream of becoming a doctor was not just a career, but a mission, a vow to herself and her loved ones. There were nights when she wondered if she had the strength to continue, if the challenges would knock her down. But when she remembered the faces of her mother and her younger siblings, she stood up, wiped her tears and continued her journey. Richard could never forget Amara's words that night. Her silence was not a lack of voice, but a restraint, a forbearance, a hidden strength. He began to feel more responsible for her than just a master and a servant. He saw himself as a companion, a light on the path ahead. One afternoon, as Richard walked through the small garden of the villa, he saw Amara carefully watering each flower, the sunlight shining through the leaves, making the water droplets sparkle on the pure white petals. Her eyes seemed to contain a dreamy sky, an elusive yet extremely resilient peace. He stood still, not wanting to startle her. There was something sacred about the way she tended each flower, like the way she tended her dream, every day, every hour. One late winter afternoon, Richard Blake's large mansion was shrouded in mist and cold winds blew through the windows. Inside, the space remained characteristically quiet, only the regular ticking of the old clock on the wall echoed softly. Richard sat in the living room, his eyes looking out into the garden, but his mind wandered to an image that had just been imprinted in his mind, the maid Amara, with a rustic face but hidden deep thoughts. He thought to himself, she has endured so much hardship, but she has never once complained, never once groaned. Was I too heartless to just see her as part of the job? The night before, Richard accidentally heard Amara's phone call through the kitchen door when she called her mother. Her voice was trembling, choked with secret worries. "Mom. I will try to save enough money to take you to the hospital. Tell Dora to study hard. When she gets her salary next month, I will send it back to pay for her tuition. Please rest assured, Mom." Hearing these words, he suddenly felt something that made his heart ache. He did not think that the little maid was carrying such a heavy burden on her shoulders. He secretly regretted that he had never asked her or shared anything with her. He truly had a fondness for her. Maybe I should do something small to help her, he thought. The next morning, Richard walked slowly to the kitchen where Amara was preparing breakfast. His eyes were gentler than usual, and his deep voice surprised her. "Amara, if you need my help with anything, just tell me. I'm willing to create all conditions for you." Amara looked at him, her eyes moist. She bowed her head gently, her voice soft. "Sir, I'm just a maid, I don't dare to bother you. I know you are always honest, always devoted to my family. I think that out there, I cannot find such a good maid. Let me do something for you. Because you deserve it." Richard sat down beside her, holding her hand. Amara was startled, her face turned red. She pulled her hand back. Richard was also a bit embarrassed about his recent action. He didn't mean anything by it. It was just an action to encourage her. She replied, "Boss, I thank you for your kindness." Then she turned around and took a towel to clean the kitchen. His kitchen was always spotless, without a single stain or bad smell. It's all thanks to Amara's hard work. The atmosphere in the kitchen suddenly became tense. Amara felt her heart beat faster than ever. A strange feeling, one she couldn't name, was running through her body. That night, back in her room, Amara sat at her desk, looking at the warm yellow light and feeling a new source of motivation rising within her. She continued to focus on the unfinished clean pages. As for Richard, sitting in his office, his eyes lit up with hope. He realized that wealth and power cannot replace humanity and sharing. Through Amara, he found the meaning of life that he had lost after loss and loneliness. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains of Richard's office, bathing the dark wooden walls and the desk covered with papers in gold. Richard sat by the window, gazing out at the lush green garden, where the gentle chirping of birds mingled with the rustling of leaves in the wind. Today, he invited Amara into his office to talk, an unexpected invitation that left her a little confused but also filled with hope. As Amara entered, Richard stood up, smiling gently, his voice warm. Sit down, Amara. I want to tell you a story. Maybe it will help you understand something. Amara sat down on the soft leather chair, eyes fixed on her boss, feeling a rare sense of closeness in her heart. She smiled slightly and nodded. Yes, sir. Richard took a deep breath, looked down at the table and then up at the blue sky through the glass window. There was a boy who wandered the small streets every day, holding fragile lottery tickets in his hands. He didn't have much, except for the big dreams burning in his heart. Every day, he woke up early before dawn, walked around every corner, offering small tickets to earn every penny to help his family. He stopped, his eyes deep with memories. That boy had no toys, no nice clothes, and had never known a day of going to school like other children. In the bitterly cold winter, he still had to go out in the street in a thin shirt, his hands red from the cold. There were days of pouring rain, but he still persevered, even though the cold penetrated to his bones. He only hoped to sell as many lottery tickets as possible. His parents also only worked as scrap collectors, from early morning until late at night, but still could not afford to buy a full meal for the whole family. Every day, he had to wake up when the night was still dark, quietly step out of the house with a thin shirt, his bare feet trembling on the cold road. In the cold winter, he did not dare to buy himself a pair of slippers to wear, because that boy always thought of his younger siblings, always thought of his parents. His parents were often sick and ill. One day, his mother became seriously ill. The illness came so quickly and violently that she could no longer stand up. The family had no money for medicine or hospital fees, and could only watch her weaken day by day, hour by hour. The boy could only sit by his mother's bed, holding her thin hand, tears silently falling down her face full of pain. He sighed, as if reliving painful memories. He had to run around and borrow money, asking the neighbors for help. When his mother got better, he worked even harder to get money for her medicine and to pay for his siblings' school fees. On long, cold nights, when everyone else was asleep, he still sat under the dim streetlights, counting every little penny he earned. Sometimes, he only had time to eat a stale meal and cry in the dark corner of his dilapidated house, but in his heart, a dream still burned. One day, he would become someone who could change his life, save his mother, and give his siblings a better future. Amara sat there listening intently, not missing a word. And that boy was me, Richard said, then he turned to look at her. Amara was extremely surprised when the boss said that the boy was him. Her eyes widened in surprise. She said, "Boss, I really can't believe it, you had such a difficult childhood, I really admire your will and determination." Amara, this life is not easy. I have never considered my childhood as a misfortune, on the contrary, I am grateful for those harsh days, for nurturing such a strong will in me. I think, you can also do what you want, as long as you have faith in yourself, and do not give up. Amara, her eyes filled with tears, choked up and said, "Thank you for sharing this story with me. I will try my best to achieve what I want." Richard put his hand on her shoulder, as if to encourage her. At that moment, the room became warmer than ever. Two people from two different worlds, sitting together, sharing stories of pain and hope. They did not need many words, just understanding and trust. Amara looked at him, her eyes shining with hope and determination. She knew that with Richard by her side, the road ahead, though arduous, would no longer be so scary. Outside the window, the sun was slowly setting, dyeing the late afternoon sky red. The last rays of light seemed to send their blessings on their journey, a journey of dreams, of resilience, and of eternal humanity. In the following days, Richard's villa became much warmer when his youngest daughter, Elizabeth, came to visit him with her husband and little girl named Bella. Bella, a little girl just over a year old, with big, round, sparkling eyes and curly hair, brought joyful laughter throughout the house, as if to dispel some of the coldness that had been there for a long time. Elizabeth is a delicate and thoughtful woman. She recently got married and is now enjoying the happiness of being a young mother. When she returns to her hometown to visit her father, Elizabeth always pays attention to every little thing, especially his attitude and actions during the days at home. Even in the early days, Elizabeth noticed something very strange in the way her father treated Amara, his longtime loyal maid. Richard not only cared for Amara as a servant, but sometimes even secretly glanced at her, his eyes revealing a gentle and somewhat distant look. The observant daughter noted this and felt curious, at the same time worried about her father. One evening, when everyone had gone to bed, Elizabeth knocked gently on her father's door. There was a soft knock, and then her voice rang out, soft and full of concern. "Dad, are you asleep? Can I come in?" Richard, sitting by the window with the moonlight streaming through, started and smiled slightly. "Come in, Elizabeth. Father is not asleep." The door opened and Elizabeth walked in, carrying the gentle scent of lavender from her light coat. She sat down beside him, slowly taking his hand, her eyes gentle yet profound. "Dad," she began, "I know how hard you worked to raise us to adulthood. Mom has been gone for more than 20 years, but I know that in your heart, the loneliness and emptiness are still there, weighing heavily every day." Richard was silent, his eyes slightly raised, the moonlight reflecting through the window illuminating the wrinkles on his face, the traces of time and the hardships he had been through. Elizabeth continued, her voice warm and sincere. "If you feel lonely, we are always here, supporting you. So you can move on, choose a companion, someone to share your life with. I think that is a wonderful thing, and you deserve to be happy." Richard could not help but feel overwhelmed. His daughter's words were like a gentle breeze, clearing away the dark clouds that had been clouding his mind for so long. He was surprised that Elizabeth was so direct and tactful, saying things that he was afraid to face. He thought to himself, "My daughter has seen this mood for a long time, but I have not dared to admit it." Her words hit the nail on the head, but they are also a priceless consolation. Richard smiled, a sigh passed through him, but inside he felt an indescribable relief. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "I have never said this before, but I know I need someone to share with. Not just a maid, but someone who can be my soulmate, my companion for the rest of my life." Elizabeth said, "Dad, does she know you have feelings for her?" He sat still, his eyes looking out the window, where the tree branches swayed in the gentle breeze. A feeling of both longing and fear tugged at his heart. Then he said softly, "I'm not sure about this, but I think she doesn't know yet. She's very carefree and full of ambition. Moreover, Amara is too young, she's 30 years younger than me. I just want to tell you that she wouldn't accept a husband the same age as her father. Perhaps we need time, patience and slow steps, so that she can feel our love for her without pressure or fear," he continued. Elizabeth looked at her father, her eyes shining with understanding and deep love. "Don't worry, Dad. My brothers and sisters will always support you, no matter what path or person you choose. Your happiness is the most precious thing to us." At that moment, in the quiet room, under the dim moonlight, father and son understood each other and opened a new chapter in their lives. A chapter full of hope and love, where Richard would no longer be alone, and Amara, his loyal maid, would also have a place in his heart. One late afternoon, when the sunlight had softened and the villa began to cast shadows, Elizabeth decided to step into the kitchen, wishing to be closer and more intimate with Amara, the devoted maid who had long been attached to her father. "Amara, let me help you." Elizabeth smiled brightly, her eyes filled with sympathy and sincerity. Amara smiled slightly and shook her head. "No need, I can do it. But if you want, go ahead." Elizabeth quickly picked up the fresh greens for dinner, her hands quickly washing and chopping them into small pieces. Amara stood beside her, watching her every move with gentle amusement. Suddenly, while Elizabeth was stirring the pot of soup on the stove, her hands were a little unsteady and the thick soup spilled over the pot and onto the stove. Elizabeth quickly turned off the stove, her eyes filled with panic. "Oh no, I spilled the soup." Amara hurried over, her face slightly furrowed with worry. "Oh no, the oxtail soup is ruined. The boss loves it, but it has to be cooked exactly as he likes it, otherwise it won't have the rich flavor he loves." Elizabeth looked at Amara with admiration mixed with emotion. "Amara, I don't think it's okay, everything can be fixed." Amara nodded, her expression serious. "Okay, I'll cook it again. I don't want the boss to eat food that makes him unhappy. Elizabeth quickly smiled and encouraged. For my father, whatever you cook, he finds it delicious, you know? My father appreciates every bit of the cook's heart. That unexpected sentence made Amara pause, her face suddenly turned red like a small fire, her eyes awkwardly avoided Elizabeth's gaze. She just gently replied. Really? Elizabeth did not take her eyes off her, her gaze probing with a hint of mischief and friendliness, as if to say, I know you cherish my father, and I understand what you do. Not letting the awkward atmosphere linger, Amara quickly took a clean bowl, poured out the spoiled soup, then placed the pot on the stove, preparing to start over. Her hands worked quickly, her eyes focused but no less gentle, as if expressing her love and respect for her boss. Elizabeth stood beside her, looking at Amara with eyes full of admiration and affection. She understood that, for Amara, taking care of her father was not just a job, but also a great responsibility. The kitchen space suddenly became warmer in the soft yellow light. The sound of stir-frying, the murmur of boiling water seemed to blend with the gentle laughter of two women, creating a harmony of sharing and affection. Elizabeth said softly, her voice full of sincerity, Thank you, Amara. You have made this house not just a place for my father to live, but a real home. Amara smiled, her eyes shining, I just want to do what's best for him. Mr. Richard is a very kind boss. Elizabeth continued to ask, Sister Amara, I heard from my father that you are learning something, right? Amara replied, Yes, I want to go to university and become a doctor. Wow, that's amazing, said Elizabeth. Elizabeth continued to ask, Have you ever loved someone? Elizabeth's question made her pause, her actions were a bit confused, her words clearly showed hesitation. She replied, Me? I haven't dared to think about that. I'm just a poor girl, not pretty, I'm already 35 years old. Who would want to marry me? Oh, no, you are too insecure about yourself. I think you are graceful, gentle, hardworking, and skillful. There will definitely be a man who appreciates that about you, Elizabeth said. Amara smiled, her eyes shining. In that simple space, the feelings between them seemed to be lit up, warm and full of hope for the days ahead. One night, when the villa was immersed in the silence of the night, Richard suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. His body became sluggish, every vein felt like it was being squeezed, a severe headache made him unable to open his eyes. His normally strong legs suddenly became weak, unable to support his body weight. He tried to stand up, but his head was spinning, each step made him tremble, almost making him fall to the cold floor. Amara, who was sleeping in the next room, was suddenly awakened by the strange noise and sensed the anxiety in the air. She rushed into the living room and saw her boss lying on the sofa, sweat pouring down his forehead, his face pale and full of pain. Boss! Are you okay? Amara knelt down in panic, trying to help him up but couldn't. Richard just groaned softly, unable to form words. Her trembling hand touched his forehead and felt the unusually high temperature. You have a high fever, let me get you a towel. She then brought a basin of warm water, wrung the towel gently and placed it on his forehead. Without hesitation, Amara immediately picked up the phone to call an ambulance and at the same time tried to wipe away the sweat, encouraging him, You have to stay strong, I will call the doctor right away. You must not give up. Richard, despite the pain, still had trust in his eyes as he looked at Amara's worried face. In that moment, he realized that her presence was not just a mere servant figure, but had become his most precious spiritual support. The minutes waiting for the ambulance seemed endless, the quiet villa became tense, the air was stifling. Amara sat beside him, gently holding his cold hand, her mouth constantly whispering prayers and words of encouragement. The fever and pain tormented Richard every minute, leaving him completely helpless, but Amara's sincere affection and devoted care made him feel warmer and more reassured than ever. When the ambulance arrived, Amara helped him into the car, her eyes filled with tears and worry. An unprecedented fear was tearing at her heart, but she knew she had to be strong to be by his side, to support him through this dangerous situation. Amara sat in the ambulance next to Richard, her hands clutching the thin blanket covering him. Her face was filled with worry, her eyes never leaving her boss's every expression, every heavy breath, every bead of sweat on his forehead. She kept whispering words of encouragement, as if afraid he would hear and feel her comfort. "You have to keep your strength up, you'll be fine," she whispered, but she wasn't sure of that herself. When the car arrived at the hospital, the medical team quickly transferred Richard to the emergency room. Amara followed closely, feeling her heart tighten as she saw him placed on the cold bed, surrounded by IVs and machines. The doctor approached, his eyes serious. "He has a severe cold, accompanied by a high fever and weakness. He needs close monitoring and special care for the next few days." In the following days, Amara seemed to forget everything around her, focusing only on taking care of Richard. She woke up early in the morning, bringing a bowl of warm porridge, gently feeding him spoon by spoon. Seeing him swallow each spoonful made her heart ache. Her hands trembled, but she still persistently wiped away each drop of sweat on his forehead with a soft towel, each gentle gesture filled with love and devotion. There were times when Richard was tired, his face pale and listless, unable to sit up by himself. Amara gently helped him up, each step faltering but full of effort. His eyes looked at her with deep gratitude, as if giving her the strength not to give up. In those quiet moments, there were no longer the boss and the maid, but only two people relying on each other to cope with difficulties. Amara thought to herself, perhaps this was the first time she felt such closeness, such intimacy with someone, not out of responsibility, but out of sincere affection. Richard, though in pain and weak, still gave her a weak smile, his eyes sparkling with faith. He knew that it was Amara's presence that gave him invaluable spiritual strength, helping him fight his illness and the challenges of old age. Amara knocked on the door and entered. Seeing him sitting, his eyes turned towards the window, looking out at the hospital grounds. He turned back, his eyes sad but full of emotion. He replied, "Thank you, Amara, I feel much better. Luckily you are here. Old age and loneliness are dangerous." At that moment, both of them were silent together. Amara looked at him and smiled warmly. Their hearts beat together, overcoming all difficulties, to live and love to the fullest. After days of treatment and rest, Richard's health gradually recovered. He walked more steadily, his eyes were warm and full of vitality. That obvious change made Amara extremely happy, and the two became closer and more attached than before. There was no longer a distance between the rich boss and the little maid, but only sincere and gentle emotional ties. One late autumn afternoon, when the gentle golden sunlight filtered through the leaves, Richard was on his way to the kitchen to prepare some tea when he suddenly stopped. From the kitchen came the sound of the phone ringing, followed by her voice, both worried and tense. "Amara, this morning Mom had a heart attack. I took her to the emergency room. The doctor said Mom needs surgery immediately. If she delays it will be life-threatening. But the surgery cost is too much, sister." Amara panicked and cried out, "Oh my God, which hospital is Mom being treated at? Let me go to Mom." She was both panicked and worried, her face was blank, she held the phone tightly in her hand, pacing back and forth in the kitchen, muttering, "Such a large amount of money, where can I get it now?" At that moment, Richard stood still outside the door, each word like a knife stabbing deep into his heart. He knew that this was not only Amara's story but also the battle for survival of her entire family. Her voice trembled, sometimes choked with fear and helplessness. In that moment, he understood that she was carrying too much on her small shoulders. He sighed softly, his eyes looking out the window. That amount of money, $30,000, was a large sum for many people, but for him, it was only a small part of the assets he had saved over the years. The most important thing was to bring hope to Amara and her mother. Without hesitation, he turned back to his room, went into the cupboard and took out a thick envelope. He had prepared all the money beforehand, not for himself but for times of need, like this. He held the envelope in his hand, feeling mixed emotions, both sympathy and determination to help the little girl who had changed him. He returned to the kitchen, where Amara was standing, confused and worried, and saw her sitting there, her eyes filled with tears, looking far away. Richard gently placed the envelope on the table in front of her, his voice warm and firm. "Amara, take this money. Go to the hospital and help your mother. Don't worry about anything. Amara looked up at him, her eyes shining with surprise and emotion. She crouched down, unable to believe the generosity and greatness of his heart. Tears silently streamed down her cheeks, mingling with a sincere smile and a choked thank you. Boss, I really don't know what to say. I will definitely pay you back. Thank you. Richard just smiled, his eyes shining with hope and determination. Just go, I'll talk about returning it later. The most important thing is that your mother must be treated, don't let anything stop you. Amara bowed her head in thanks, quickly wiped her tears with a handkerchief, then hurriedly packed a few things. She packed her small luggage, and immediately left. Before she left the door, she turned back to look at Richard, her eyes filled with gratitude and trust. Richard nodded, his voice soft as a promise. Take care, and believe in yourself, Amara. On the way to the hospital, Amara was filled with a mixture of emotions, worry, excitement, gratitude and responsibility. She held the envelope of money tightly, not letting it fall even once. She kept praying for her mother's health, for the family to overcome this crisis. When she arrived at the emergency room and saw her mother lying there, her face pale but her eyes still strong, Amara could not hold back her tears. She held her mother's hand tightly, gently whispering words of encouragement and promises, as if she would shoulder the whole world in exchange for her mother's life. The afternoon sun faded behind the fallen leaves that covered the path around the villa. The last song of the day was faintly heard in his ears, but in Richard Blake's heart, an unprecedented restlessness was stirring. He sat quietly in his familiar leather armchair in the study, his eyes fixed on the large window, his mind lost in memories and thoughts. The image of Amara, the little maid with brown eyes filled with dreams, appeared clearly. Late at night, he saw her studying under the gentle yellow light, busy working and worrying about the future. Richard realized that, at the age of 65, he had never seen life that way, full of determination, resilience and full of aspirations. He suddenly realized that he had been lonely for too long, but now there was a flower quietly blooming inside him, making him gradually regain his. He stood up and walked slowly to the window, his hands clasped together, his heart heavy with thoughts. What could he do to help her? How long had he lived only for himself and his strict habits? How long had he forgotten that there were many people out there who needed a helping hand? Richard thought about his own poor childhood story, a boy with nothing but dreams and determination. Now, despite being successful and wealthy, there was still a void in his heart that needed to be filled with sharing and humanity. The door opened slightly, and Amara entered, holding a tray of afternoon tea, her eyes sparkling with caution and a hint of hope. She looked at him, then smiled gently, as if to send a message that, no matter how difficult the situation, she was not alone. Boss, here is your tea. Her voice was gentle but determined. Richard nodded and invited her to sit down. Amara, you have given me a lot to think about. I want to know, besides working and studying, what other dreams do you have? Amara looked at him, her eyes teary but determined. I want to be a doctor, boss. To be able to help my loved ones and those less fortunate than my family. That simple yet powerful sentence was like a fire burning in Richard's heart. He knew he could not stand by and watch her struggle with life alone. And above all, he wanted to be the one to support her, not just with words, but with concrete actions. That afternoon, the atmosphere in the villa seemed to soften, carrying the warmth of trust and new hope. Two people from two worlds, with different stories, but sharing the same desire to live fully and bring value to life. More than a month has passed since Amara left the mansion to care for her mother in hospital. Richard Blake's large house remains familiarly silent, but inside, something has changed, an undeniable absence. When the iron gate opened that morning, Amara walked in with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Her mother had miraculously recovered and was discharged from the hospital, leaving her feeling as if a huge burden had been lifted from her shoulders. But the longing and responsibility towards the rich boss, who had helped her when she had no one else to rely on, still tormented her. She still played the role of a devoted maid, everything was the same, cleaning every corner, arranging every table, preparing meals regularly. But when she saw Richard, Amara couldn't help but worry. He looked different from the last time she had seen him. His once sharp eyes were tired, filled with a deep, unspoken sadness. His skin was pale, his gait slower than before, and his usual grace seemed to have been eroded by time and illness. Amara stood silently by the living room door, watching him as he leaned back in his chair, his thin hands clasped together, his eyes looking out the window but not really seeing anything. An emptiness filled the large room, as if the whole house was sighing with him. "Boss," she called softly, her voice filled with worry. Richard turned his head and smiled awkwardly. "Amara, you're back." "I'm fine, I've just been a little tired lately." Amara walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder as if to give him strength. "You've endured so much alone. Without anyone to care for you, I know how hard it is." Richard sighed, his eyes looking straight at her, as if seeking comfort from that sincerity. "That's right. Maybe I was too independent, too proud to bother anyone. But now I realize that loneliness is like a burden heavier than illness." Amara bowed her head, her heart tightening. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be here, taking care of you like you did for me. We'll get through this together." He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of Amara's hand, like a small fire warming his old heart. "Thank you, Amara. Your concern is the most precious gift I have ever received." From that day on, Amara became more than just a maid, she gradually became Richard's spiritual support. She knew that for him to recover, he needed not only medicine but also love, sharing and faith in life. In the following days, Amara changed her routine. Not only did she complete the housework, but she also spent more time talking to him and taking care of him. She read him stories, his favorite calligraphy lines, or simply sat next to him in silence, so that he would feel that he was no longer alone. Richard also began to open up, sharing his thoughts, memories, and even his long-hidden fears. Each story he told was a step forward in his spiritual recovery, a gradual connection between two people who seemed infinitely apart. However, both of them knew that the road ahead was still full of challenges. Richard's health was not yet completely stable, and the emotional wounds could not be healed quickly. But with companionship and sincerity, they believed that they could face any storm. Outside the villa, the evening sky gradually faded into the sunset, the gentle colors covering the ancient walls. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the fragrance of the white flowers still blooming in the garden. It was a sign of life, of hope that never died in the hearts of resilient people. As time passed, Amara finally got into the medical school she had always dreamed of. The good news came on a sunny early summer morning. In Amara's hand was the admission notice from the city's prestigious medical university, the place she had always dreamed of going to. She stood silently for a moment in front of the villa gate, her eyes sparkling as she stared at the paper as if she couldn't believe it was true. All the sleepless nights, all the tears, all the times she wanted to give up, all of it now seemed to have been worth it. Richard stood on the steps, saw the little girl holding the paper in her hand, tears falling but a bright smile on her lips. He said nothing, just walked over, opened his arms like a friend. Amara threw herself into his arms, bursting with emotion, whispering, "I passed. I really did it." "You deserve it, Amara," he said, his voice warm and proud. "Go to school, live the life you've always wanted. Don't worry about me, I'll always be here, waiting for you to come back." From that day on, Amara officially entered the university, carrying her mother's love, her own sacrifices and a silent belief from the man who gave her more than help, a solid spiritual support in life. 5 years of study passed faster than she expected. Amara graduated with honors, was the best student in her entire course, and was offered a job at a major hospital in the city. She was not only a doctor but also an inspiration to many other medical students. The story of the maid who became a doctor spread as a symbol of determination. And she hasn't forgotten where she started. Soon after settling into her job at the hospital, Amara opened a small clinic near a poor residential area, where those who couldn't afford to pay could still be examined and treated. She spent every Saturday afternoon examining patients in special circumstances, lonely elderly people, street children, migrant women. Every smile they gave, every tearful thank you was a reward greater than any salary. Richard, although retired, still comes to the clinic every week. He sits in the waiting room, observing the girl from years ago, now wearing a white blouse, her eyes firm but still gentle. His eyes shine with pride. Sometimes, he helps her take down the patient list, chats with the elderly, makes hot tea, like a silent partner. One late afternoon, after the examination, Amara sat down beside him and handed him a cup of tea. They said nothing, just looked out the window at the long sunset. The silence between them was no longer distance, but a mature sympathy, like two streams silently merging into a vast ocean. As the days went by, no one said anything, but everyone around them understood. Amara and Richard were now an indispensable part of each other's lives. Even though there was no romantic confession, no cinematic gestures, every glance, every silence together, was the strongest oath. One Sunday morning, when Amara brought coffee to the porch where Richard was reading, he put down the book, looked at her for a long time, and then smiled softly. "Amara, I thought my life would end in loneliness. But you changed everything." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears, and without hesitation placed her hand on his. "And I thought my life would be nothing but darkness. But you were the first person who believed in me. They don't need any titles, no fancy weddings. For them, love is about quiet days together, cooking together, caring for each other, listening and healing together. A relationship is not about showing off but about nurturing, little by little, with time, with sincerity, with gratitude and deep respect." And so, the old mansion, once filled with silence, now became a real home. The space was filled with laughter, the smell of baked goods, the occasional sound of children running around when Bella and her mother came to visit. Richard was no longer a man living in the past, but a partner, steady, gentle. Amara was no longer a little maid, but a mature, radiant woman, standing by his side as a choice, not for salvation, but for true love.